It's the NFL preseason. Check out the Ringer Fantasy Football Show on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you need fantasy rankings, we've got our rankings and sleepers at fantasyfootball.theringer.com. So come listen to Danny Heifetz, Craig Horlbeck, and me, Danny Kelly, on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago and the guy was like, you're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago. I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk. Now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me on the other line, he knows real Z's move in silence. It's Andy Greenwald!
Z's? Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Talking about Big Dave. Andy, it's a huge day in the town. And while I am, in one sense, talking about Matt Bellany's podcast, I'm talking about Hollywood. And there's really nobody better to comment on this momentous day in Hollywood as we await these Warner Brothers earnings calls and finding out what's going on with HBO Max and what happened to Batgirl. Is a 44-year-old man in his mother's home in Philadelphia weighing in on this. So I'm so glad I can join you today.
It's not just that, buddy. It's like we surveyed the landscape and we were like, okay, let's see what's cooking. What's cooking in Hollywood today? We're like, oh, big news dropping. Seismic shifts potentially in the streaming landscape. What time's that dropping? Ooh, 4 Eastern? Nah.
That's Miller time out here. Come on now.
let's do our best Jackie Harvey and the Onion, the outsider's view, and just make some suppositions early. And so we've got a lot of other good stuff today.
We have a packed show. So we want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Warner, HBO Max. We want to talk a little bit about the first 2 episodes of Reservation Dogs, which dropped this week, season 2. And then, of course, it's industry season. So we had to get the bad boys back. Mickey Down and Konrad K joined us again to talk about the first episode of season 2 of Industry, their approach to making Industry this year, and just what we can expect from the rest of the season. I think we're going to have Mickey and Konrad on a couple of times over the course of the season. So we're really excited to have that dialogue and see where that dialogue takes us.
I'm going to hold space for that conversation.
Let's hold space for David Zaslav because he's out here with a corn husker. Is that what they do when they husk? They've got like a scythe,
Wow. That's also what people tune into this podcast for a
45-year-old
metaphors bookish Jew in the east side of Hollywood just dropping Nebraska knowledge. You know what I mean? Like, here's what you do. You take the seeds, you put them in the ground.
And then the children of the corn, they come and they take it out.
That's fine.
Andy, so there's a couple of different ways to talk about this. There is a macro Hollywood streaming wars, how we consume content now conversation that's happening because, in case people don't know who are listening to this podcast, there's been a lot of rumblings in advance of this Warner call that's going to happen this afternoon. I suppose if HBO Max somehow gets shot out into space, we can come back and do a topper for this podcast. But as of right now, the idea is that there will likely be some restructuring going on at this relatively new company that is Discovery HBO. Right, that they might
Discovery Warner,
Discovery Warner,
and Media Discovery, whatever,
and that there might be some sort of merging of 2 streaming services between Discovery Plus and HBO Max. That there might be some layoffs made because of redundancies between the 2 companies. That some people may have noticed that some shows that were available on HBO Max seem to be disappearing, that some movies that were original HBO Max or Warner originals put on HBO Max seem to be disappearing from the service. That's weird. I think that that's like a whole thing of like, what are we doing with this content? Like I've seen a couple of really interesting threads from showrunners and from creators on Twitter talking about like, this is really precarious if you make something and then all of a sudden the digital parent of this company of your thing decides it goes away. And honestly, I'm talking to somebody about that right now, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the future for the TV show I made is. I don't know where it will be, if people will be able to see it. I don't know if it's just going to turn into a pumpkin. And I don't mean the holiday perennial, it's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, which is available to stream. It is a real point of conversation with people that you'd better get a physical copy of the thing you made and have it in your home, because this idea that, I'll just live on streaming, that's not really the case, as we are learning. I think there's a bunch of different ways into this story, and I think probably the best way is to just go macro to start, which is to say, for people who haven't been paying attention, David Zaslav is the CEO of Discovery, which is a very successful suite of networks and brands, including like the big one recently is the Magnolia Channel, which was in the news today, right? And
today there was a press release saying that the Magnolia Channel would be airing or putting some of its content on HBO Max, which kind of goes against the idea that HBO Max was imminently going to be shuttered.
So he has taken over this new company, and there's been a lot of rumors about what's going on behind the scenes and about how that culture fit is going to happen. Now, this is not a new story in Hollywood in the era of major corporate mergers, right? There was a similar conversation when John Stankey and them Texas boys took over HBO and with AT&T, and what was it going to mean and what was going to happen. And I guess it meant Game of Thrones was on people's cell phones for a minute, and then Richard Plepler left his job, and then basically it was business as usual with HBO, and they launched what has turned into a pretty successful streaming service. So you have to definitely take a lot of this news through the lens of the Hollywood community isn't necessarily a big fan of David Zaslav, not for reasons of having worked with him or knowing him, but he is an East Coast executive without the creative background. Like, he didn't do development of series at CBS for a while before switching and like going up the ladder. So he's coming in to this world, and there's a lot of protectiveness about what that means and what his point of view is. It has always seemed like an inevitability that if you have a large corporate media company, you should make all of the corporate products and media products available together. So again, they shuttered CNN Plus basically as it launched.
About 10 days after,
Inevitably, the back episodes of Tony Bourdain's Parts Unknown were going to be streamable somewhere. And it was announced today they will be available on Discovery. Again, it doesn't make sense long-term to silo those two things away from each other. Like in the realm of these worlds, like, you should be able to watch episodes of Industry and then watch Parts Unknown or any other product that's in that world. So that for the consumer, all of that long-term makes sense and is probably inevitable. That said, there were some confusing moves behind the scenes leading up to this big investor call today, right? Like, at the same time, I know this anecdotally and personally, and just from talking to people here, like, at the same time this summer when all the stories were coming out, like Joe Adalian's piece in Vulture and New York Magazine crowning HBO Max.
HBO Max is the best streaming service for the money, right?
Behind the scenes was a different story was being told, not necessarily that it was a bad service or that it was a bad place to work, but there was a lot of stuff just vanishing or deals going away or, well, this was greenlit, but now we have to reconsider it. And again, was this normal? New boss comes in, looks under the hood, makes some budgetary reprioritizations. Yeah, that's probably normal. The extent of it, unclear. Yeah. At the same time, one of the biggest things Zaslav has done is re-up our boy, the Watch's number one or number two fan, Casey Bloys, chairman of HBO, to a big multi-year deal, which would suggest the opposite of what people's fears were in the town, right? That, like, he recognizes the heater that HBO has been on and, ensuring stability and good creative relationships, all of that. So that's some of the backstory here. The first dominoes that started to fall this week that led to this call. And again, it was important that you mentioned the thing about creators being like, my show is vanishing, because that kind of fear is real, but it's also fueling the Twitter froth that usually does not come before an earnings call on a Thursday afternoon in August.
The sort of the chatter about what is happening right now is related to something that is the headline of this whole thing, which is essentially the announcement that Batgirl, a $90 million movie made by the directors of the Bad Boys remake and several episodes of Ms. Marvel, was going to be canceled. Not straight to videoed, not delayed, not we'll put it out in theaters and see what happens. It is gone. A movie starring Leslie Grace.
Michael Keaton apparently.
Had Michael Keaton reprising his role as Batman in it, is just gone. And it's when, it doesn't take a genius. I mean, every article about this has said this is for tax purposes. That if this movie never comes out, if it never sees the light of day, its $90 million production so far could be considered a write-down. Now, you go cue the Seinfeld scene that I saw many people tweeting yesterday, where it's like Kramer and Jerry talking about they just write this off or write it down. And Jerry's like, what's a write-down? And he's like, I don't know, but they do. And that's why they write it down. It's like, I don't know how not having a movie that's already cost you $90 million not out in the world works. I do kind of wonder whether or not people at Warner's have been taking a look at what's been happening at the box office this year, where it's like, oh, wow. So it seems like people are going to the movies again. Now, they may not consider Batgirl movie theater ready, but they may also be like, why would we just put this on a service when we don't think it's going to add value, a subscriber value to the service?
I think there's at least 4 pieces of play here that need to be examined and treated kind of credibly. One, this was clumsy. There's no version of this where this wasn't clumsy and deeply offensive to creators who spent a ton of time and heart and energy and enthusiasm making something. That sucks. There were stories about how the directors found out at one of their weddings. One of the guys was getting married, and they found out like minutes before this was announced. Leslie Grace has now made a statement about how upset she is about all of this. People really work hard to make things, and the thought that it's just going to vanish because of a corporate strategy is devastating. And so we need to honestly be respectful of that. Another piece of this, though, that's worth considering is it's not uncommon for when people take over something to repudiate the previous regime's strategy. And Jason Kilar, who was relatively briefly, but very significantly, was the chair of Warner Media before the Discovery thing. He's the one who implemented the strategy of we're going to flood the streaming service with content to make it competitive, which arguably worked. This time, a year or two ago, we were talking about his incredibly clumsy, the town hates him decision to put all of Warner's theatrical slate
which
onto the
included
streaming
Tenet
service.
and Dune. Yeah.
And the ripple effect of that was Christopher Nolan picked up his atomic ball and took Oppenheimer elsewhere out of his longtime home at Warner's. Denis Villeneuve is still salty about it. People were angry. But it worked for Jason Kilar's corporate goals. It put HBO Max on the map and got people watching it and talking about it. So that was successful. The new regime is looking at a different landscape that you alluded to, which is, okay, so they spent $80 to now $90 million on a movie that's essentially a tweener. And what that means is we'll never know. It's totally opaque. But I think it's probably credible, the reports that we've read, that the difference in terms of new subscriptions and new eyeballs for a $80 million movie on a streaming service versus a $30 or $40 million movie is negligible. Except by negligible, I mean that's $40 million more dollars to spend.
Right.
So $90 million sounds like a lot of money, but that's also half of what theatrically released action movies tend to cost these days.
If that.
So if that, exactly. So they have a movie that's a tweener. It's too expensive to be a streaming original, and it's too cheap to get seats, to get people's asses in seats in the movie theater. And so it seems like they discussed amping it up. But then what are they doing? There is the tax piece of it that you're pointing to, and I think it's probably credible. But there's another piece too, which nobody wants to talk about. And I don't mean it to be judgmental or to take away from the legitimate anguish and hurt that the filmmakers and actors and everyone in the crew are feeling. But if the movie was amazing, it would be released. You know what I mean? Like, it would be. I'm not saying has to be a masterpiece. I'm not saying it's outwardly bad.
Well, this is the thing is that, like, I don't know if you've seen, like, there's a lot of really shitty stuff out. That's what I'm trying to understand is that, like, somewhere somebody did the accounting or the math and was like, this movie is basically worth more to us for if it vanishes than if we put it on the streaming service with like a one-day announcement, you know, that it won't draw in new subscribers. Now, this leads to a whole other parallel conversation about the kind of devil may care. We can have 7 different realities in DC.
This
and whether or not that is coherent, and whether or not people are kind of like, I don't know what the fuck you're doing. Like, there was reports in this Batgirl stuff about Michael Keaton was supposed to be in Aquaman 2, and there was a test screening, and people were like, why is Michael Keaton in this movie? And so now they're just putting Ben Affleck back in there, even though Affleck had like fully basically like hung it up. So this sort of like wild, crazy times going on with that IP that they were like, oh, well, we could just do whatever. And some of it can live here. And then James Gunn can have this playground and this can be over here. And there can be 4 Batmans and 6 Harley Quinns and 4 Jokers. Maybe people are like, I don't get this.
I think we are reaching multiversal fatigue, which is definitely an
bad
issue.
News for Marvel.
Exactly. But it's not just the idea of a multiverse story, which again, I think, and I'm not just trying to credit Marvel because I generally like their stuff more than DC, but there does seem to be a slight method to their multiverse of madness in that they are putting up Jonathan Majors, as Kang, and like all of this is his Machiavellian doing. And so there's going to be some resolution at the end of it, whether it's Secret Wars or whatever it ends up looking like, right? The DC flood the zone strategy, which was at times brilliant because Joker got nominated for an Oscar, but honestly came from total disorganization at the top. They didn't go in being like, we should have 9 Flashes. They were just like, we need to compete. We have a tentpole film slotted into the release schedule without a script yet. You know what I mean? So it doesn't, I think it doesn't work from the top down. And what I mean by that is back to Zaslav, who buys this company. And as far as multiplex stuff goes, franchise is still the name of the game. And the crown jewel of the Warner Empire is still the DC universe. Like, that's the one that they have, right? That's the one that can generate all these different shows on all these different platforms and get people into theaters if done right. And he's looking at it and he's just like, this isn't going to work if we have like classes of superheroes.
And it's too expensive if it's not going to work. Yeah.
Exactly. The barrier for entry is too high now. I mean, we're learning with the Disney Plus stuff too, with like Star Wars and Marvel. Like, we may be saturated, you know, and there's value in stepping back, but we don't need to go in that direction. But it is just to say, the Batgirl thing, it's probably too much, and they should, you know, and it does ultimately dilute the brand. So
this may sound like we were kind of like, it doesn't even matter if like Batgirl is good or bad. You know, I think the point is that it's being treated as a line item in the budget of a huge conglomerate, as it always has, going back pretty much to even the golden age of Hollywood that we talk about. But speaking of the golden age of Hollywood, here's a personal anecdote that I think illustrates what I see as the more existential issue facing us right now, which is also a personal one. So the other night I was like trying to find something to watch with my mom, and we had just done the There Will Be Blood rewatchables a couple weeks ago. And in the research, Paul Thomas Anderson talks a lot about how he was watching Treasure of Sierra Madre all the time while he was making that movie. And I was like, you know what? It's been like a good 10, 15, if not 20 years since I've seen Treasure of Sierra Madre. That must be somewhere at my fingertips, seeing as how I have subscriptions to 7, 8 services at this point. And so before I came to Philly, I Googled that, and it was on HBO Max. And I was like, great. I love that they have these Turner Classic movies in this catalog. I love that. That's a really awesome like little feather to have in the cap. So when I'm going to get home and I'm going to watch this with my mom, because I know she loves Humphrey Bogart movies, I get back, I fire up HBO Max. It's not there in search. I look at my computer. The other day, my computer said, that's on HBO Max. It's no longer in HBO Max. That's not a big deal. Sometimes you would go to the video store and you would say, oh, I wanted to take this movie out and they don't have it, so I'll have to find something else. I was able to find something else. The annoying part was that I didn't have to pay for the right to go into the video store. You know what I mean? And I think that what we're kind of approaching right now is we had this brief moment where we were like, wow, this is really cool. Like all TV and all movies ever are going to be available to us pretty much at the touch of a finger. And we'll always have something to watch and we'll never be bored. And like, there will always be something to talk about. And now I think that somehow the act of watching movies and television has just been made more complicated, more expensive, and less rewarding, you know? And when you kind of get into this zone where like, you develop a fandom of people who want to see Batgirl and Barbara Gordon come to life in a movie, or because they've been told that like DC has all these plans. So they're going to subscribe to this service and that service and make sure that they're a part of it and read about it and care about the rumors and all this stuff. And then they're like, you know what? Actually, it's less expensive to just fuck you guys over and put this away, you know? And it's the same thing for people who are like, I'm going to subscribe to this because it seems like they have a stable library of some of my favorite films. And I understand that these deals are complicated. I understand the fucking computer wasn't invented when John Huston made that movie, much less do they have like an idea of like where Treasure of Sierra Madre will live in perpetuity digitally. But it is frustrating as just a person with a finite amount of money and the finite amount of time to constantly be running in circles because of the machinations of these companies. And as you alluded to, like shit is just disappearing from HBO Max. So far, it's nothing that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that I can't watch Camping again. But that is annoying and that is weird and it is strange.
To me, it's really best exemplified by the 2 emails I got last week, where I got an email, I don't remember what day it was, but it was like, from your friends at HBO Max, soon to be laid off. No, it was like, from your friends at HBO Max. And it was like, treasure your memories at Hogwarts one last time. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and the gang will be leaving HBO Max, so don't forget to watch your favorite movies of the Potterverse. And then the next day I get an email from my friends at Peacock, and they're like, buckle up, wizards. Here we fucking go. Grab your owls and wands. The Potterverse is back home on Peacock. That's because these 2 services trade this enormously valuable franchise back and forth every 8 months. Like what was the cup in Philadelphia? You know, like when the local teams play, like it's like the fucking regatta, right? Like it's absurd, but that is the world we're living in at the moment while this stuff is getting worked out in real time. And to the larger point, I think one of the reasons why we felt generally confident doing this podcast and starting this conversation today before we know a lot of the way this is going to shake out practically is just because for all we're talking about, they lost Harry Potter, they lost Treasure of the Sierra Madre, they lost American Pickle. But HBO Max is still a very successful streaming service with the HBO content on it. And David Zaslav isn't dumb. Like he's not going to shut it down. That's where the narrative kind of lost.
If he does, though, like I'm clipping this, and that's gonna be the promo for this podcast.
1,000,000%, and you can run that along with me being like, these Better Call Saul guys have no idea what they're doing, and then that can be the attack ad on me.
Right.
When someone runs to replace me as co-host, because I believe this podcast operates like the county sheriff's office. But it also, and we don't even need to open this can of worms. But again, separate and apart from like hardworking people losing their jobs, hardworking people with great creative intentions not having their visions realized or made public, which I am on that side.
That's the shit we don't like. Yeah.
But when we cover the industry, all of this does seem to keep coming back to some original sins. Like, what is HBO Max original programming? What is that? Right? Like, it never made sense from the beginning. And in the beginning, there was just a separate team being like, okay, our buddy Patrick and Paramount, thank you for pitching us Station 11. HBO and HBO Max will now fight over the rights to potentially buy this series, even though we're the same company. That's how Hacks is an HBO Max show from Universal. What? Right. That doesn't make sense. So then there was a reshuffling in the last era where Casey got control of all of it, and it seemed like things were starting to make a little more sense. We knew what HBO shows were, and we started to know what HBO Max shows were, and they were more things like Peacemaker or the upcoming Colin Farrell Penguin show. So they're the more branded, more broad shows.
Genre,
there's more reality shows, Selena plus Chef or whatever that show is called with Selena Gomez. Like, okay, it's starting to make sense. Now, is HBO Max a good name for the service? I still don't think so. Do I still understand like the giant posters, for We Own the City that's just like streaming HBO Max and HBO Original? Okay, sure. They're still undoing this knot. And so I wonder if today's announcement will be part of that. But largely speaking, Hack Season 3 is happening. You know what I mean? Like HBO shows are continuing apace. That isn't what's changing. But the way that but behind the curtain, things are reshuffling and it will play out for us over the next few months and years. It's not, I don't think it's going to be a consumer issue today. I think the issue today is going to be like, oh, Chip and Joanna Gaines are going to be on my streaming service.
Yeah.
Neat. I don't really see that. That's my prediction, but we'll find out.
We'll find out more. We'll talk about it more. By the way, programming note coming 12 minutes into this podcast, we'll probably be putting up
minutes. Our 24, baby.
Putting up our episode early next week. We'll be putting that up on Tuesday to respond to Monday night's Better Call Saul. So we had obviously been going pretty close to the airing before, but circumstances make it so that we have to do it the following day that day. So Tuesday will be the next watch after this, and we'll also talk about the HBO stuff. Let's talk a little bit about Reservation Dogs before we get to Mickey and Konrad.
I would love to.
Let's talk about just regular old TV. But it's actually like TV unlike anything we have seen before. I don't know. I mean, in some ways it is, but it's really, for something that was so critically acclaimed, seems like it's going under the radar this week.
And I think it's going under the radar, not just because it's the dog days of summer, as opposed to the Reservation Dog days of summer. I think it's getting dinged for having a normal ass schedule. Season 1 premiered a year ago. Guess what, guys? Season 2. That used to be called TV. And I get the feeling people are like, whoa. It's been a busy year. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to come back that fast. Guys, make time. I love this show so deeply and purely, and I admire it so much. And I feel like for me, there is the absolute top tier of TV this year. And they've been very distinct experiences, but very pure. And obviously, The Bear is one of them. And part of the enthusiasm about The Bear for me was the surprise, the thrill. Oh my God, they did what? And they're doing it, and the world is noticing, and that was so joyful. Another great show of the year for me was Barry, which was kind of the opposite experience, which was, oh, I don't know about this anymore. Is that still holy shit? Mm-hmm. They jujitsu'd me and elevated to a place they didn't know they were capable of. Reservation Dogs, again, there's nothing traditional about the show, which is at once the most cinematic comedy. It's the most like lived in indie drama. It's so many things all at once. But the most traditional thing about it for me was, boy, they really figured this show out while making the first season, and they were ready to go make it again. There is absolutely no drop off. These 2 episodes that are available now on FX on Hulu are masterful to me.
You know what I thought? Because we are talking about this after we've recorded our conversation with Mickey and Konrad. And I couldn't help but notice some parallels between some of the things that they said about making Industry Season 2. And I think, I've said, and those guys were responding to this idea that the first season was this sort of act of punkish rebellion in some ways, or like kind of like flying without a map. And that they were like, we realized we kind of did need some rules. Like to make it an effective show, we needed to have like a plot engine. And I kind of detect the same thing with Reservation Dogs, and it's a good thing. I detect some really like subtly expert, like even just with Willie Jack addressing the camera head on to start the first episode and kind of do a recap. That's like just a stylish, effective way to ground the audience and lay out a menu for you about where you're going. You know what I mean? Like just the way in which the efficiency that now essentially these first 2 episodes, I think you could generally call one big episode in some ways, but it was just, you could tell that it still had a little bit of its wandering spirit. It still had a little bit of its indie like kind of sensibility, but it also had the like, hey, we're going to have Jackie on this show now as a major character. Like this is how we like kind of bring somebody from the background to the foreground and give them something of their own storyline. Do you know what I'm saying about?
Yeah, but it's also like an incredible victory lap to start the season with it. As you said, she's talking to camera and we get a montage of where things have gone in the relatively short amount of time that's elapsed since the end of last season, where Brownie like turns away the tornado and Alora Dan and Jackie run away to California.
Right.
But all these other little details, like the Kirk Fox character has received a horse in the tornado.
Yeah.
It's so funny. And it's so rich, and you're like, oh my God, Wes Studi's on this show. Like all of these great performers and characters and people who I've never seen before last season, and I can't wait to see them again and be back in this world with their interconnecting storylines and just deadpan reactions. And it's so, for me, I mean, it was joyful to be back. But again, I get the sense that in addition to, leaning into some structure and building on the foundation that was there before, Sterling Harjo is just like, oh, they get my jokes. The things that my friends and I think are funny, the viewers
America
will also
thinks
are funny now too.
Yeah.
So now we're just going to let it ride. You know what I mean? And I don't feel any, and I don't know if there were, or if it was just my clutching the brakes a little bit because I wasn't sure to give into the show yet last season when I didn't know what it was. But like, I see it just flows the way these two episodes particularly can just meander from truly absurdist comedy that it makes me laugh out loud to a surprising left turn resolution to the let's steal the truck full of flamin' hot snacks that started the season, started the series. Like, that was deeply touching. Bear is depressed in these two episodes.
Yeah.
And the show is just like, yep, one of our main characters is just depressed and alone. And there's space for that in this world in such a profound way. Like the casting, Josh Fadham, last seen in Better Call Saul, doing a very strange guest turn as we don't really know if he's a good Samaritan, but it's just weird and funny. Like, I don't know. I just feel like this show is magical. It makes me really happy to be back in it. It's executing on a level higher than almost anything else on TV.
We'll talk about it more in depth. It's a good time right now because we do have a couple of really, really great shows on between Saul and Industry and Reservation Dogs. And it's nice to have these kinds of like more human dramas before we get to Dragons and Rings. So,
oh my God, Dragons and Rings and She-Hulks.
And She-Hulks. Yeah. Don't criticize the CGI of She-Hulk, man.
I would never.
Let's get into our interview with Konrad K. and Mickey Down, the writers, the creators of Industry, some of our favorite possible guests. We have been adoring the season so far. Andy and I we've only seen 2. The second episode is coming on Monday. I will be candid and say there is some like allusions to things that happen in 2, but I don't think that there are any specific spoilers. But, if you really want to, feel free to leave this interview until Monday night.
I would say we don't really talk specifically. I don't think it's a spoiler just to describe the emotional sensations of something that happens in episode 2, but your mileage may vary on that. And was important. It felt important to talk about it at least a little bit in terms of what their goals were for the season. Because we usually don't do this. Second episode's incredible.
Second episode's great. Okay, so let's get into our interview with Mickey and Konrad, and then Andy and I will be back Tuesday to talk about Better Call Saul and who knows, the future of Hollywood.
I'm talking about Sandman next week. I don't know where you're going to be. I'm ready. I waited 30 years for that.
Bye, guys. This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. New Year's resolutions are fun the first couple of weeks. Then you kind of maybe conveniently forget about them halfway through January. No shame. It happens to us all. But this year I have a foolproof plan, at least when it comes to saving money. Just switch to Mint Mobile and you're done. Goal accomplished, because for a limited time, their wireless plans are $15 a month when you buy a 3-month plan. The great thing about Mint Mobile is there's no jaw-dropping monthly bills or unexpected overages, and all plans come with unlimited talk and text. Get this new customer offer today at mintmobile.com/watch. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need. Have coverage options to protect the things you value most. File a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
If you went on a road trip and you didn't stop for a Big Mac or drop a crispy fry between the car seats or use your McDonald's bag as a placemat, then that wasn't a road trip. It was just a really long drive. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
Why does this room look amazing? What'd you change?
I just got these custom shades from Blinds.com. It's all online, so it's really easy.
I remember shopping for blinds. I waited around all day just to get a quote. It took forever. And the worst part, hidden fees. How about you?
I chatted with my Blinds.com design consultant on my time. Plus, they make it easy to DIY or add installation like I did.
Blinds.com sounds way better.
Way better.
Shop Blinds.com for up to 45% off. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Mickey and Konrad, the creators of Industry, the writers of Industry, they're joining us again on The Watch. I think this is now appearance 3, although it feels like it's more than that. So they're entering the S-mail zone of Watch guest spots. We had you guys on to talk about GameStop. We've had you guys on to talk about season 1 of Industry. It's amazing to be talking to you about season 2 of Industry, which came back with a bang this week. Andy and I talked about it on Monday's pod, but we're so glad to have you guys back on. What's up, guys?
Hey guys, thanks so much for having us back. We love this show. I was texting Andy saying, like, hearing you guys talk about it, not even in such nice terms. I mean, like, I can hear you slagging it off for hours and hours and hours. Hearing you say that you like it is even better. But it's so funny. It's like, obviously we were massive fans of the show before we started coming on every week. But it's like hearing some of your favorite sort of characters from the show talking about you. So.
Oh, I want to know which character from the show I am.
But yeah, it's great. Thank you.
What was incredible is leading up to season 2, Mickey, you and Konrad had very different ways of anticipating and speaking about it. Because Chris and I both have talked with you off pod, offline, and in the build-up, you were working on it, you were in production, you were in post. One of you, I won't say which, you can out yourself, was like, you're going to fucking love it. And the other one was like, ooh, hope you like it. Now, does that you can tag yourself in that comment and then maybe update us on how you're feeling?
I don't know. I don't know which one was which to you.
Oh, interesting.
Because sometimes I'm one of those and Konrad's the other. It depends how close we were to premiere. Because I feel like as we get closer to the premiere, Konrad gets more confident, I get less.
Yeah, it's a pretty cyclical thing. I think we, I don't know, we guys have talked to you about this a little bit, and we had a lot of, I guess having watched season 1 come out in the world, we were pretty surprised with the response to it and surprised at the upside in terms of the way people liked it. And we just felt that we were very sure about the things that worked about the show and didn't work so well. And I think we were pretty harsh critics, and we wanted to diagnose all the things that we could do better. And I feel like, for better or worse, I think a lot of what sees, you can only hope that it goes so far as to your own kind of mind, Mickey's collective imagination, what ends up on screen. And I feel like, there's that famous quote that, if you've got like 60% of what you wanted on the screen and you succeeded. And I feel like we've done more than that with season 2. So like we were sort of very I was, at least in this instance, quite confident for it to air, and quite excited, to be honest.
Well, there's another famous, like, I guess, quote, a cliche, which is like, you wait your whole life to make your first album, and then the problem is you have to get up the next day and do it again. And I was wondering, part of what I think captured a lot of people's imaginations about the show was this feeling like it was coming from this incredibly unique pair of voices. I guess unique and pair is not the same thing, but this incredibly original place, and that you guys poured yourself into this show. So what was it like to go and reload and do it again?
It's interesting that this sort of unique and pair thing, because I feel like me and Konrad have such a symbiotic relationship. And I remember we always say this, but like we do think with one head almost. Like we almost, to the detriment of the writer's room or other people in the writer's room sometimes, because I'll start saying a sentence and Konrad will finish it. And then, or I'll say, you know what? And then Konrad will go, yeah, definitely. And then everyone else in the writer's room will be like, what did they just do? But yeah, I mean, as Konrad said, we didn't know how it was going to land. We were so excited when it came out and got the reception it did. And then when we got the backing from HBO to do a second one, we were just like, we have to leave everything on the field now. Is that the right metaphor?
Yeah, that's right.
Doing great.
For everything at the wall, whatever you want to use. But yeah, I mean, we just really wanted to just do it again and level up as much as we possibly could. And as you know, as being given an opportunity, we just thought there was no point doing it if we weren't. And yeah, I do think, going back to your previous question about how confident we were. I mean, this time I was confident that me and Konrad delivered something that we were really happy with. I didn't know whether that was going to, it was going to be a success for anyone else, but it was enough for us quietly that we had done something we were proud of.
Andy, you said yes when you were reviewing the show yesterday. You said that the vibe was immaculate or whatever, and we felt like the first season was very much a question of that kind of raw energy. Like I think Chris, you said that it was like a bit of a punk rock thing, and it was kind of we were allowed into the studio and like you could smash around on the instruments to see what happened. I think we felt like what the show really lacked was a very good story engine, and it had good feel, it had good characterization, like the interactions it was a good world to hang out in, and that can be enough, obviously, to keep people coming back. But we were like, if we could marry this to a proper narrative engine that kept people coming back week to week and had stronger episodic hooks and didn't lose any of the stuff that we liked about the show, which was the kind of hangout quality, some of the more esoteric observations, the references, all of that stuff that we, and the soundtrack, all that stuff that made people sit up and take notice in the first place. We had another showrunner come and join us on this season called Jamie O'Brien, who was far more experienced than us and was just really good at holding us to account on certain rigors about episodic storytelling. And me and Mickey, and I know you guys have the same belief, that this whole idea of 8 hours of film when you're working in TV makes absolutely no sense. You've got to be telling distinct hour-long units of story in a serialized manner. And I think she basically held us to a higher standard with that stuff. And I think it helped the show tremendously.
Can you talk specifically about that in terms of, coming out of the first season? I wondered, there must have been things left on the whiteboard or left in your own experiences, like whether, the whole, 32nd floor or whatever it is of private wealth management is suddenly open now to Yaz. And I imagine that's something that you guys were aware of and found space for in a second season. But I was wondering about the balance between big ideas, character things that you knew you wanted to do versus that granular, I'm not going to spoil anything. We're going to air this before the phenomenal second episode comes out. But in the second episode, it was noteworthy in a way that I really appreciated, that there is a gesture, like reaching a hand across the table, that is a repeated hook to that episode, if you know what I mean. So I'm wondering more about the granular episodic decision-making that you're talking about being pushed to in this season.
The sort of textual writing that me and Konrad love, and I think sort of the thing that we started doing when we started working together, I mean, we wanted to keep as much of that as possible, but again, we did so much of that in season one, so that, at the detriment of any kind of noticeable story. And I mean, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, Konrad, but an executive at HBO, I think it was Amy Hodge, who actually she wasn't at HBO, but now she is. She said that we were, what did she say? Incredible interior designers, but we didn't know how to build a house. Which was great, because we were literally like, okay, well let's spend 6 or 7 months choosing the faucets, while the actual structure of the house actually is going to fall down. And that's what we were obsessed. We were obsessed with imagery. We were obsessed with dialogue. We were obsessed with characterization. We were obsessed with reference, and we weren't able to turn that into 8 hours of storytelling. And I think in a film, you can get away with vibe. You can get away with atmosphere. You can get away with hangout. In a novel, you can get away with style. You can get away with atmosphere. But I feel that I honestly, genuinely feel, and this is something that we've actually had to learn. And I think it's actually a product of experience, and also of getting get a little bit more humility, realizing that actually 8 hours of storytelling is very, very difficult, and you need more than one other person to help you do it.
Definitely. Another rule that we told ourselves in season 2 was, this is maybe another tortured sports thing, but there's no reason why we can't pitch our fastball all the time. And it's not like we thought about that. We were like, a lot of seasons of TV, they think about they don't think about having the energy of a finale in their first 3 or 4 episodes. It feels like, we need to build to something. Whereas we set up, without any spoilers, we set up the sort of Harper-Eric axis, which was the key axis of season 1. Mm-hmm. We were like, along with Harper and Yasmin, I guess, why don't we just expedite that story as quickly as we can and make sure that, the first 3 episodes feel like each one is going at 100 miles an hour. And almost our rule in the writer's room was, let's burn through this story as quickly as possible and not serve it for the end of the season, because that stuff will come. But it really served the dynamism and the pace of the show to put those big story tent poles in terms of big seismic things in the universe of the show happening as quickly as possible, as early as possible in the season.
I have to call out. Sorry, it's a legendary flex. I thought eating a popsicle on the podcast was the pinnacle, but now you guys individually dropping a baseball and an American football analogy in the first 10 minutes.
It's also like, Konrad, if you just want to be like, we can't do TV like Marcelo Bielsa coaches a football team, I'll get it. We can do
it's
the
rest. It's a safe space for some of you.
Guys, this is the Ringer, isn't it? I mean,
no, you're doing great. It worked. They both played. I got to call it out.
Mickey, you were talking about the humility that you were sort of learning. And one of the things I've noticed, and again, Andy and I aren't going to spoil anything that happens in episode 2, but I've obviously noticed like a theme of surrogate parents kind of emerging from this season, or people creating these sort of surrogate parent relationships, sometimes which cross lines with different characters. And I was curious whether or not there was any like TV writer stuff, not that you learned, but that you were like, oh, this is why people do this. Like, this is why people might like kind of like follow this character into this corner, or like put these two people together in a car or something like that. Because it was something that I feel like it wasn't something that I felt like the first season lacked, but I do feel like in this, the first few episodes of the second season, you really start to see like, it's like the artistry of it. Like you're actually like, you can make these connections between characters because you guys are being a little bit more, putting the themes a little bit more in the foreground. Was that something where you guys were like surprised to find out that certain tropes or certain ideas were actually quite useful to use?
Absolutely. I mean, just we can hang all the stuff we love doing, which is the texture and the characterization and all the references and stuff. We can hang that on a more traditional storytelling. And we thought that those two things were anathema to one another, and we actually realized they're actually totally linked, and that they're actually very important, and that you can actually tell a quite simple story, hang all the complexity off the end of it, and it feels like it's very complex. I mean, we went back and watched loads of episodes of Mad Men, and we realized that these are very, very simply told stories, but in a sort of pretty luscious way. And we thought, okay, well, we tried to do that, and then we ended up actually complicating it far more than it needed to be sometimes. But yeah, I feel like Jamie O'Brien, who came and helped us, I think it was the fact that we had done a year already, and we'd seen the stuff that worked in our work, and she was able to have a sort of outside perspective of the stuff that worked, and she realized that this is such easy 101 screenwriting, but the best stuff is the stuff that pushes the story but also gives you the texture. And I feel like sometimes, the best stuff does that. Sometimes you veer off into the more textual writing. Sometimes you hang way too much story on the scene. And there are a few moments even this season where I think we smashed the story sledgehammer a bit too hard. Like there are a few beats in there which I thought, oh God, we should have really removed that. Like personally, I think in the first episode, the end of this scene where Harper wakes up and realizes that Robert's cleaned her room and has left a note for her. I always really fought against that note because I thought, okay, he does. We don't need to know that she's going to move into Robert the next episode. It's enough that he cleaned the room. So Stuff like that, I feel like that's those are concessions we make. I think sometimes. I mean, like I agree with Mickey. Like I think sometimes we went too far, and you could sort of see the narrative cogs turning a little bit too much. But yeah, sorry, Mick, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I totally agree with you on that beat. Yeah, I mean, but on the other side of that, in season 1, there was like a 2 or 3 page monologue from a character we've never met before called Casper, talking about how he grew up in a housing estate in the Netherlands and had a Muslim family in his block, and it had absolutely no bearing on the story whatsoever. And we
fucking
really
ruled.
We really fought for it, and we were like, "This tells you everything about Casper." And HBO and the producers were like, "Who gives a fuck about Casper?" We thought it's really important, and just stuff like that, like we needed to have the mirror shown to us sometimes, and for them to say, look, you're still learning how to do this. And I honestly think, that's why I go back to the humility thing, Chris, in that, I think it's very easy to jump into this world of screenwriting, shall we say, and think, okay, well, I've seen all the things I like. I've seen all the things I dislike. I'm sure I can do better than the things I dislike. And then realizing actually it's much harder to do it than we anticipated. But yeah. I think there's a youth. There's things that people responded to in season 1 was the kind of the youth and the punk thing that you guys said, which was like, oh, this is a real fit of expression, and we were kind of laying the track as we went along, and it did feel a bit like that, and it was slightly haphazard. And
I think the painful lesson we learned was that, as a thing, I'm just tagging on what Mickey said, but like you come in and when you're young, you're like, oh, we can be really iconoclastic. Like we're obviously, the rules don't apply to us because we're so good at X, Y, and Z. And then we learned the hard way that there is in 8 hours of story, those you are subordinate to the rules of keeping people engaged. And they're on some level, very simple story beats. But with great actors and good dialogue and good production design and good music, those things are buried. Like, and they're the things that subconsciously keep people coming back. And I personally think it really elevated the season. And you worry about seeing the seams in the work, but I think as the creators, you see the seams yourself, and then hopefully an audience don't see them quite as much as you do.
One of the real charms of the first season, and maybe this speaks to the kind of punk rock energy we responded to, was that not only were you guys doing this for the first time, but a lot of your cast was relatively unknown, and certainly we're not used to this level of a production or of exposure. When we talked to Myhala, whom we adore, like she was like this, the show was me, because she had not really left the country before and suddenly was living in Wales, leading a television show for HBO. So that all, kind of plays into the meta enjoyment of the first season, because you can feel people finding themselves and realizing their abilities, and it worked within the story that you were telling. And then you guys have to do it all again. So what was it like? And not even, the purpose of the question isn't like, give me tea, but like in the American sense, please give me tea in the British sense whenever you invite me. But getting the gang back together, young actors who have had a journey and coming back to play these characters for a second time, that's very different than the youthful energy of like, yeah, let's give it a go. My main takeaway from the whole creative experience was that it was me and Mickey were and this was from the producers all the way down the cast and crew. We had a very obviously rigorous hiring process of directors, DPs, and I think we were just far more professional. This is just speaking for me and Mickey. We had an incredible sense of energy about the second season, because not only did we feel it was a massive privilege to get to do it again, but we had the very real feeling that I imagine like a sports manager gets, where they watch a team play and they get to basically coach that team again for a second season, and you can be like bang, 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 bang. So you can, it's a very, as I say, I used the word before, but very diagnostic thing. So me and Mickey had this amazing amount of like, oh my God, this creative energy, which actually permeated the cast. Like when they were coming back, I think, they obviously, we were very lucky in what a good team of people we assembled in front of the camera. But I think you can probably tell this season 1 to season 2, they've grown in confidence and ability just by having watched themselves, which, they came off a really high base already. But I don't know, Mick probably can speak better to this than me. My abiding sense of the whole creative process on season 2, from the moment we started writing the scripts to the moment we basically finished the edit, was I felt like the whole thing was very communal and everybody singing off the same hymn sheet and everybody pulling in exactly the same direction. It was smooth sailing, really, wouldn't you say, mate?
Totally. As far as productions can go, especially productions being shot during COVID, it just felt like everyone was pulling in the same direction constantly, and we were all moving towards the same goal. It really did feel like that. It didn't, and there were the normal production fires, obviously, but it just felt like every single day, it felt like we were going towards the thing we wanted to create. And I don't know how, I've only ever worked on one other production, so I've got absolutely no way, which is this show. I've got no way of knowing whether it was normal, but it felt like we were really, really doing something special. And I felt proud of the cast. I felt proud of the crew every day. I felt proud of Konrad. And I felt really confident, despite what I probably said to you, Andy. I did feel confident about what we played.
You've correctly identified yourself in the story. Yeah, like you got up to get another pint, and Konrad's like, you're going to love it. It's so good.
So in the intervening time between when season 1 ended and season 2 begins, obviously we've had a pandemic. There's also been, I think, an explosion of interest in the world of finance, probably due in no small part to your show, but also like I came out of COVID and everybody I knew was talking about like Adam Tooze's newsletter all of a sudden. And, we're getting into digital finance and all this other stuff. And I kind of wonder whether or not that increased interest spurred you guys to really drop the gauntlet and be like, you guys thought we had jargon last season? Fucking strap it on. Here we go. Because it's not even like, I saw there was a Vulture piece that was really good about like the sort of music of the dialogue and not always knowing what people were talking about. But there are points where you're like, I need Investopedia open while I am watching the show.
I need Duolingo open. Episode 2 was just like watching a foreign film that I was enjoying for large swaths of it, and I loved it.
That's really funny you say that, because we did some press before the show came out, and me and Konrad kept talking about the fact that we've made the dialogue and the fire lines jargon in season 1 was impenetrable. We made it way more decipherable. We've held the audience's hand. We've got a couple of people saying a couple of things, explaining things. And then weirdly, Andy, I actually watched a little bit of episode 2 today. And honestly, I was like, how the fuck is anyone going
to look, I can't sugarcoat this. Way worse than last time. This is the beauty of industry. So again, we're not spoiling it. People have a treat awaiting them on Monday. But like the last 15 minutes of episode 202 is just like transcendent. It is ecstatic. I loved it. It was one of the most thrilling things I've seen on TV this year. I didn't understand a fucking word. I don't know. I cannot overstate how little I understand what they're talking about. And I don't mind. And it actually leads me to a kind of conceptual question I had for you guys, which is inspired by watching your show, which is,
what did you do with your money?
No, what is money? And I mean that literally. And I'm not asking you guys to, this is not clickbait to get you to be like, money doesn't matter. Like, money matters in people's lives, of course. But for these characters who operate in this world, what even is it? Because in the scene that we're referring to, characters are like, I'll pay this much for quid. No, I'm buying dollars, and I'll pay you for more dollars tomorrow if you give me a hamburger now, but also I'm hanging up. I don't know what they're saying. But so what is it?
Money is love.
Oof. Yeah, there you go.
But money's love. No. A less try answer is, just to go back to that sequence you're talking about at the end of 202, that was when me and Mickey first sold the pilot of the show to HBO. We wrote, there's a scene at the end of episode 1 where Harper trades for the first time, and we wrote in that script.
She makes the sale to Nicole, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We wrote in that script that the following unfolds like a car chase. And we never actually made good on that promise with that script. And me and Mick were like, okay, we have to do our equivalent. We always want, and as stupid as it sounds, we always wanted to do a trading sequence that felt like an action sequence. And so we were like, we need to do our version of like, this is very high praise, but it was, and not necessarily our benchmark, but we were like, what if Michael Mann was doing a trading show? How detailed and how difficult would the sequence be? And we were like, okay, so let's make this feel like a bank robbery. Is that possible when people are talking on a phone? And I'm not saying necessarily we got there, but like the amount of obstacles we threw at Harper and the amount of cutting and the way it was shot, and like it's very close to what we initially envisaged the kind of high point emotionally and energetically of the show being. So the fact that you guys liked it is fantastic to us, because it really was for like going back into that in season 2, I would say it's one of our top 3 highlights. Wouldn't you say, Mick?
Absolutely. And it's credit to everyone involved in that sequence, from the directors, Birgitta Stemmoser and Eric Morberg Hansen was the DOP, and the editor on that. It was a very, very tricky thing to achieve, trying to make a trading sequence for like a car chase, especially when no one understands. It's quite easy to understand what's going on in a car chase. One car is chasing the other, and in this one, someone was calling an FX desk to find out if a current client had sold some Noki, which I doubt anyone even knows what Noki is. It's a pasta to most people.
You literally could be making all of this up, and that's the beauty of it. It's fine.
But again, going back to what is money question, I actually was not thinking about that exact question today, but I was thinking more about in the context of a show and actually what the character actually want. And I was actually thinking, why do they want money so much? Because we were thinking about, I don't know, I was talking to you, Konrad, about this, but like you never actually see them spending it ever. Like you actually
or enjoying it. Yeah, right.
The only person enjoying her money is Yasmin, who had it pre the show. So, you never see Harper buying any clothes. You never see Harper going on holiday. You never see Robert doing anything with his money at all. No one actually uses money in this show, which I thought was actually quite interesting. And I feel like, I guess it's not really about, we've spoken about broadly about the show being a sort of exploration of a certain type of person that makes money the North Star of their life. But it's actually, I guess, when money is totally and inextricably linked to ambition. And it feels just like it's the arena that sets the heart beating the most. I feel like that's why people go into it. So I've gone off your question. I guess what I'm saying is...
It's a really good answer. I totally agree with that.
But it's also like on the floor, these people are kind of allowed to act as their the most true versions of themselves. It's almost like that's what they've been paid to do in the first place. I think there's even a line in 2 about like your alpha stuff works if you're delivering, but if you're not, it's actually like basically an HR violation. And it's like, but everybody's sort of insecurities and vulnerabilities and also their strengths and their character traits are on complete and full display. I mean, even the introduction of the loudspeaker, which I don't think was in season 1, right? Where like you can Harper a couple of times starts talking into a microphone that the entire floor can hear. I mean, what's more naked than that? Than having an office conversation on a loudspeaker is crazy.
Yeah, I think charting how much of their real selves is on display and how much of it is performative is really it's different character to character. So I think one of the moments that I find most powerful in the first episode is the one where Robert finally drops the act when he calls Nicole, because it's like, oh, he's gonna allow. I mean, me and Mickey talked about the second season a lot in the writers' room. We were like, what is the central question of this season? And it's, we created what viewers thought was a very cold world. What is the possibility of vulnerability and connection in this world between people? Are they ever going to be at the same point in their arcs or their journeys or their own relationships, their self-worth, where they'll be able to connect? And I think the power of season 2 for us with me and Mickey was always like, all of these characters are ready and willing to be vulnerable, but they're always just going to miss these connections with each other because they're not going to be in the scene at the same time to allow that thing to happen, to allow the possibility of being their true selves. So I would argue we see true Harper, we see true Yasmin, we see true Robert, we see true Eric, we see all of these characters, and we do see them vulnerable, and we see what they really feel about themselves. But we never see it. We never see them interact in the same scene and show that thing together. And I think that possibility of misconnection is kind of, people always say to us, like, what is Harper and Eric's relationship about? And me and Mickey are always like, they're like, is it as simple as mentor-mentee, father-daughter? Is it this thing? For us, it's always that, are they going to sleep together? Are they going to kill each other? Do they want to kiss? Do they want to hug? It's always that unspoken thing of when we want to tell each other our true nature, but we're never going to, we have too big an armor up to ever do that.
And I think sorry to jump on you, Konrad. I just want to say, I think one of the successes of season 2 thus far is that you're working with directors who notice the missed connections. The camera is always on the actor in a way that I've been really compelled by, so that when Harper behaves in a certain way, you cut to Eric taking it in. And there are moments of vulnerability in those cutaways as well. But again, she's on a call or he's angry at someone else. And so you reinforce it with the visual language of the show in I think a more intentional way this season that's really coming through.
Understanding the inner life of the characters through the filmmaking was one of the first conversations we had about how to change the show. Because, this metaphor that we always torture is that the first season felt a little bit like watching the characters through a fishbowl, like almost like going to the zoo. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, wow, they're behaving crazily over there. I think that's kind of interesting. There's a vibe to that. But then you didn't really, and because we were so in the present as well in the first season, I just think the motivations for that behavior, the actual fear, the wounds in those characters didn't really feel like they were coming through that much. And simple things like getting close to the characters, actually physically closer with the camera, helped massively. And the thing you were saying, Andy, actually allowing in the editing to gauge a bit more of the other characters' reaction to them without actually just like steamrolling over to the next scene or to the next insult or the next barb really, really helps. And yeah, I feel like the characters are able to show vulnerability in this season the way they weren't before. And a lot of that, I don't know, I don't want to spoil anything, but a lot of those moments of vulnerability are when the characters are alone, which probably says more to the people they're hanging out with in the show than they themselves.
Is this the time to talk about Rishi and Hillary's mask? I don't know if I don't want to take over the rest of our time together, but talk about vibes, like the decision making of how to empower your brilliant supporting cast and when to let them have the screen and hold the thing, like the dude only wearing a mask. I feel like production-wise that may have presented some issues and maybe the actor had some feelings about it, but it is so deeply and consistently and reliably funny that I love it. And again, we're speaking ahead of ourselves, but Rishi, who makes a big impression in the first episode, really takes control of the narrative for large chunks of episode 2 in a way that is so fulfilling and really great.
He's excellent. I mean, he really just took the bull by the horns. he's in a bit of season 1, but Sagar Radia, the actor, he we spoke to him before, and he was asking about us just sort of when we were writing it, like, how much am I going to be in it? I'm not really sure. And we thought, okay, well, you know what? We love the character. Let's just throw everything at him and see what he can do. And because the benefit of actually only starting to go into production after you're halfway through the writing process is that when something reveals itself to be excellent, you can just throw more at it. 4 episodes in, when we realized he was really, really good, and we started shooting him, it's like everything, which is why he's in it a lot in the back half of the season. But he's absolutely brilliant.
We were also very conscious. I mean, we were lying if we said we weren't very conscious. There was a very good Financial Times article about how Rishi was one of the most interesting characters in the show, even though he was on the sidelines, because he was a depiction of a British Asian man, but without any of the usual stereotypical hang-ups normally put on those characters, like their relationship to whatever, their Britishness or their home, where they come from. And his alphaness, bravado and confidence was all the stuff that Sagar read that piece, and we read that piece, and we really responded to it. And we sort of doubled down on making him the kind of the alpha male of the show, really. And I think, it's everything Mickey said, like Sagar just we gave him some of the chewiest, funnest dialogue, and he over-delivered, really, which was amazing to our ears.
By far the funniest thing about the first episode is like the realization that everyone is pretty much friends with him except for Harper. When she's just like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you guys are all going to his drinks? Like, but it also speaks to like her isolation, which I think is really great. But it was so funny when she was just like, yeah, I wasn't invited. That's cool.
We made a bit of a virtue of that, because it was, I don't know why this happened, but for some reason Yasmin was going to those drinks, and I don't think we ever wrote her as going to them. I think we just wanted to get all the actors into that space. Yeah. And then me and Konrad were thinking, like, when we were shooting it, like, why are Yasmin and Rishi friends? Actually, no interaction together. But actually, Chris, what you said, it really helps. It's like you got that shot, and Yasmin is like bringing a bottle of champagne, like hugging someone. It's like, oh god, like. It really helps with Harper's isolation. Harper's thinking, like, I've been out a year, and like Yasmin and Rishi are like best buddies.
But also it underscores stuff that you've already laid. Like, that's the best stuff in story, right? When it's like you didn't intentionally lay the track, but it's there, and it's baked into the show that Yasmin is just more socially comfortable and socially fluid, and she can get away with more, and she knows how to build relationships and not have to like worry about them or stress about them. And I think that was really well played in the intentional dislocation you gave us in season 2, which I was talking about the other day on the pod, which is just like, you talked about how you found some traditional story beats and story logic and found some comfort in that and structure in that. But I think starting the show in a place where these characters aren't friends and haven't used the time off to get closer was pretty radical. It was disconcerting, because I think our TV brains are like, boy, we went through a journey with these guys, and okay, we did a lot of cocaine, but now we're pals. And it's like, life doesn't necessarily work like that. These people don't have to be best friends.
Well, and they're also not like, we're going to cure COVID. Like they're still who they are, right? Like
those kinds of elisions, I think, are far more filmic and cinematic than they are in TV. And I think I totally hear you, Andy. I think me and Mick were very conscious of the fact that we wanted to start everybody in it, not to dislocate the viewer so much, but just in a place where we just thought it was interesting development to start. Robert's a very good example, because he starts almost sober. He feels almost like a 180-degree turn from where he was at the end of episode 8 of season 1. But then, it's not like, sometimes I think that was a really big jump, but then like he does have that scene with Daria, where his nose starts to bleed in the riff speech, and she's like, you're a cokehead. That would give him something to ruminate on. But we just thought it's practically, in a really cynical way, we just thought it was more interesting to jump people back into a place where the characters had jumped forward. We just thought everyone would be like, oh, okay, there's a bit of catch up to play, but it also gives the actors something else to play. It immediately, from a very cynical point of view, makes everything feel a bit fresh.
We had the organic break of COVID as well. Like, we actually was a bit of a godsend, because we had this idea of pushing it a year forward, and we thought, okay, without that organic break and that sort of forced isolation, how would we do that? You'd be even more dislocated if you came back onto the floor and Harper was there and everyone was being mean to her, but it was not explained why. And again, like the COVID thing was, we sort of ummed and ahed about whether to include it or not. And obviously there was one part of our brain which was saying, no one wants to watch 8 hours of this COVID thing. which I don't think they would have. If we had set the whole thing during the actual pandemic, it would have been terrible. But the other part was like, how do we actually make this feel like it's speaking to contemporary working life?
That's happening in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the most interesting thing about it is that how it's affected people, and people have had hugely different reactions to it. Like everyone had very different pandemics, especially in London. Some people took the rules very, very seriously and didn't go out at all and didn't see their friends or family. And other people, usually from a different socioeconomic background, behaved very, very differently. Like, which is what, people said, like, I think Marisa had this idea. She said, she read the script page for the first couple of episodes. She said, wow, Yasmin's doing a lot of drugs. Like, when did that happen? She was sort of a wallflower before. And I said, well, she's had a pandemic where all she's done, as she said in episode 4, is go from enormous kitchen to enormous kitchen, quote unquote, seshing with her rich European friends. And she's been in this bubble where everyone's very social, everyone's very, very coked up, everyone's very sure of themselves and confident. And then she comes into the world and she sees Harper, and she realizes, and it's sort of, and Kenny comes back, and she's just immediately transported to the version of her that existed at Pierpoint without that. Again, obviously Harper's had a huge amount of isolation. She's been sitting in the hotel room for a year, thinking that she's been doing a really good job. And in fact, the cold water is about to be poured on her when she comes back to work and realizes that her 12 hours a day has been, as Richie says very eloquently, just walking around a hotel room, attacking herself and drinking coffee.
What emboldened us as well was the fact that there was no homogenous experience of COVID for everybody. So like, we were like, anything that we put on screen character-wise is going to feel true, because every, as Mickey's just said very articulately, like it could be very local. It was global, obviously, via social media, but like everyone was, countries were having different responses at different rates, masks, mandates, all this stuff was changing so much. We just thought if Wyndham's wearing a mask and everybody else isn't, I'm sure there's a workplace somewhere on earth at some point in the last 2 years where it felt exactly like that. So all of our creative decisions, we were like, if we did it with a light touch, people would feel it, as long as it didn't drive plot too much, people wouldn't be bored by it. It would just feel like, it's in the universe of the show. These guys are acknowledging it, but they're not making it the kind of the North Star of what they're trying to do with the second season.
Also, as Chris and I both individually but personally experienced, the shadow of COVID in the UK currently is not as long as it is in some other places. That was.
I saw some of the critics say, "Oh God, the most striking thing about this is there's only one person wearing a mask on the trading floor." And I honestly think if you went to the trading floor now, 0 people would be wearing a mask in London. Like,
I didn't see anyone wearing a mask in London.
No one wears a mask in the airport. Again, Konrad, the thing you said about Robert and the idea that he's done almost a 180 in his personality from this party boy to this almost monk. I feel like if you're young and someone says the kind of comment to you that Daria says in that lift, and then you're immediately put into a situation where you're isolated for a year, you stew on that kind of thing, and you think, God,
absolutely.
Is that the person I think? I think Harper's been doing the same thing. Harper's been stewing on her relationship with Yasmin, and Yasmin's been doing her best to push it to one side. And as much as you say, people have moved on, I don't think about it anymore, I still think she's been thinking, she's got that version of Harper, the one that got rid of Daria, the one that felt was a bit Machiavellian, and, almost, fucked her career up in some ways. She's got that sort of ingrained in her, frozen in time in her. And I feel like,
totally.
You've kind of shattered my illusions about Yasmin, because I thought maybe she had spent the pandemic watching the 100 greatest horror films and had just, gotten through The Descent and was just like making her way through Carpenter Next and stuff, just really having a super chill last 2 years.
Me and Konrad discussed that line before. You're talking about the favorite film being The Descent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We put that line in. We put that line in, and Nick was like, "Do you think she's old enough to have used that as a reference point?" And I was like, there's no reason why she can't have binged it on a hangover.
I love it. It just makes me want to hang out with her even more. We don't want to take up any more of your guys' time, because we'll have you on at least one more time, if not 2, throughout the season to talk more about the season as more people get to see more episodes.
Do you guys want to I don't want to put you on the spot for it, but you said you were asking yourselves what the question of the season was. This is going to air this week. People are about to see episode 2, which we love.
Oh yeah.
Anything you want to put in people's heads, like in terms of what to come or what a question to consider going forward might be?
It's a great question.
Thanks. And also, sometimes I wish this pod was video because it was literally like, Siri, what does it look like to put someone on the spot? It was amazing.
You guys you can leave it as like the HBO Max like text where it's like Harper makes a decision. Eric reacts, like.
I don't know. Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? I like that.
That's good.
And then, I mean, I would just say, without any big season tease, the episode 2 is my, like, me and Mickey. We go back and forth about what our favorite episodes of the season are, and we feel like in terms of what we were trying to set out to do with the show, in terms of the balance between personal work, all of those things coming together, we feel like it's maybe the best example yet of the show. So we're really looking forward to it coming out.
Episode 7 as well is absolutely brilliant. I will say that. That's the most
Who's confident now?
There it is.
Guys, very good as well.
Thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us, guys.